Now, have you ever wondered how many rock legends have slipped through the cracks? Well, you're in luck. I have a list of some of the bands that were pure rock and roll powerhouses that time has just simply forgotten. Get ready to discover the best music you've probably never heard as I reveal 8 more bands I bet you've never heard of. So in my last video, I introduced you to some bands that I thought you'd never heard of. Well, it looks like I didn't try hard enough, as many of you knew all about them. Well, I'm back with some more to test your knowledge on, many of which have been suggested by you guys out there. Now, let me know in the comments how many of these you knew this time around. And be honest, don't cheat. First up, we've got Bodkin. Now, these were a Scottish band formed in 1972. They were part of the early wave of progressive rock, mixing hard rock with the complexity of prog elements. Their self-titled album Bodkin is a treasure for fans of Hammond organ heavy rock. It features intense instrumental sections of raw, emotional energy that immediately grab a listener's attention. Tracks like 3 Days After Death show you just how easily the band mixed heavy, dark guitar riffs with the changing sounds that remind you perhaps of early Black Sabbath, but with more complex psychedelic feel. Now, the album features long instrumental passages where the band's interplay really shines, particularly with keyboardist Mick Riddle's organ solos. Now, although they had the potential to break through, Bodkin remained relatively unknown, and this was largely due to a lack of significant record label support, sadly. They were a band that stayed true to their sound, even as the music industry started shifting towards more accessible, more commercial rock. But without that all-important backing of a major label, they just simply couldn't tour widely enough, and this limited their exposure. Today, their only album has become a rare find for prog rock fans, showing how their dark experimental music still has a lasting impact. Let me know if you've got a copy of it. It could be worth quite a lot. Next, let's look at Nucleus, one of the key pioneers in the jazz rock fusion genre. Formed in 1969 by trumpeter Ian Carr, Nucleus mixed complex jazz improvisation with rock rhythms and created a unique and forward-thinking sound. In 1970, they released their debut album, Elastic Rock, and this was a groundbreaking release featuring tracks like 1916, which showed off an ability to mix heavy rhythmic bass lines with bold, unusual horn and wind instrument melodies, an unusual combination. Nucleus didn't just add a bit of jazz to their rock, they were creating really something new. They were expanding the limits of rock by blending strong jazz harmonies and experimental styles. However, their sound was often seen as too niche and intellectual for mainstream rock audiences, which is perhaps why they never found the same level of fame as contemporaries like Soft Machine or Weather Report, and that's a shame. Despite all this, though, they built a dedicated following in progressive music circles. The band's ever-evolving lineup over the years included some of the most talented musicians in British jazz, helping them stay musically adventurous. Albums like Solar Plexus in 1971 kept experimenting with new sounds, but their complicated and sometimes hard-to-follow music made it so difficult for them to become popular in the rock or jazz scenes. Nucleus broke up in the late 70s, but their influence on fusion music is still felt today, with that Elastic Rock album being seen as a key album for fans of experimental jazz rock. Now, formed in 1971, Fields took a softer, more pastoral approach to progressive rock, focusing on lush arrangements and harmonies. The band was led by bassist and vocalist Graham Field. He was formerly of Rare Bird, who brought his classical influences and love for complex music into the fold. Their self-titled debut album is full of rich melodies and layered instrumentations that seamlessly blended folk influences with the grandeur of symphonic rock. One of the standout tracks, A Friend of Mine, is just a perfect example of how Fields crafted those deeply emotional yet musically intricate songs with a strong emphasis on storytelling. But despite being incredibly talented, Fields struggled to gain the same traction as their prog rock contemporaries. Their sound while sophisticated, just didn't align with the heavier, more theatrical prog that was gaining popularity at this time. Their music was more introspective and mellow, which may have contributed to a failure to capture this much-needed wider audience. Now, after that debut album failed to make a significant impact commercially, the band broke up, leaving behind just that single album that would later become a hidden gem among prog rock collectors. Have you got a copy? Let me know in the comments if you have. The Fields remains a beautifully crafted album, an essential listen for fans of softer, more lyrical sides of prog rock. Now, let's move across to the Netherlands with the band Exception, that masterfully fused classical music with energy and innovation of progressive rock. Founded by pianist Rick van der Linden in 1967, Exception set themselves apart by reinterpreting classical composition from the likes of Beethoven, Bach or Tchaikovsky and blended them with rock instrumentation and jazz-inspired improvisation. Quite unique. Their breakout came in 1969 with their self-titled album, where their version of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony really became an underground hit in Europe. Exception's sound was as daring as it was unique, with van der Linden's keyboard work providing both power and finesse. He really was very exceptional. Songs like The Fifth and Air brought a refreshing, cerebral approach to rock music at a time when the genre was exploring its boundaries. However, this reliance on classical covers may really have prevented them from gaining more widespread commercial success outside of Europe, as their niche appeal wasn't really as radio-friendly as the music of the bands like Yes or Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who were also experimenting with this classical influences, but incorporated more original material in their content. Exception continued to release albums throughout the early 70s, each one pushing their classical rock fusion further, but they never broke out into the global mainstream, sadly. Nevertheless, their pioneering work remains an inspiration for musicians interested in blending rock with high art platforms. Now, fronted by the legendary voices of Elkie Brooks and Robert Palmer, yes them, Vinegar Joe were a powerhouse of blues-infused hard rock in the early 1970s. Formed in 1971 from the ashes of the band Dada, Vinegar Joe quickly gained a reputation for their raw, high-energy performances, with Brooks's husky, soulful delivery and Palmer's smooth, charismatic presence, creating quite an electrifying dynamic. Their sound blended gritty rock with blues, soul, and even a touch of country, giving them really a very unique edge. Tracks like Proud to be a Honky Tonk Woman exemplify their no-holds-barred approach to rock, with scorching guitar riffs and Brooks's fiery vocals driving the song forward. But despite having all the elements for success, Vinegar Joe never quite broke into the big leagues. Internal struggles and the fact that really Robert Palmer was becoming more focused on his solo career led to the band's dissolution in 1974 after just 3 albums, sadly. Their music, while critically acclaimed, didn't align with the more polished rock that was becoming really mainstream at the time, and they struggled to get the promotion they needed to reach a wider audience. Seems a bit of a theme here, doesn't it? Now, after Vinegar Joe disbanded, both Elkie Brooks and Robert Palmer went on to achieve significant solo success. But the band's legacy as that raw, energetic force of early 70s rock remains something of a hidden gem. Then there's Pavlov's Dog, a prog rock band with one of the most distinctive voices in the genre. Their debut album, Pampered Menial, released in 1975, introduced the world to David Surkamp. Now, he had a high-pitched, vibrato-laden voice that immediately set them apart from their peers. But these vocals divided listeners, with some finding them deeply emotional, while others found them almost too eccentric. Now, this unique vocal style, however, gave Pavlov's Dog a certain charm and made tracks like Julia, for example, really unforgettable. The band also stood out for their fusion of symphonic prog elements with more accessible rock melodies, appealing to both hardcore prog fans and perhaps the more casual of listeners. Despite their strong debut, Pavlov's Dog struggled with internal issues, label disputes again, and this rapidly changing music industry. Their second album, At the Sound of the Bell from 1976, featured contributions from well-known musicians like Bill Bruford and Andy Mackay, but it failed to capture the attention of the wider public. Their sound was perhaps just too quirky for mainstream success, yet not quite experimental enough for the hardcore prog audience. Over time, however, Pavlov's Dog developed a loyal cult following, and their early albums remain cherished by prog rock fans who appreciate their unique blend of emotional songwriting and complex arrangements. Formed in 1975, though, Cathedral brought a dark, gothic sensibility to progressive rock. Now, their debut album, Stained Glass Stories from 1978, is a masterclass in blending heavy guitar riffs, symphonic elements, and complex, winding song structures. Songs like Introspect and Days and Changes, for example, just showed how the band could mix sad melodies with heavy, dark rhythms. Their music had an eerie, almost mysterious feel. It was influenced by classical music and early metal. It made Cathedral stand out in the prog rock scene at the time. However, this more introspective and somber style didn't quite fit with the dominant trends of the late 1970s, which was really moving towards either more radio-friendly rock or the emerging punk movement. Their music required a certain patience and appreciation for deep, layered compositions that really might have been too demanding for the average rock listener at the time. Consequently, they remained in relative obscurity, and after their debut album failed to gain widespread attention, Cathedral split up in 1979. Now, despite this, Stained Glass Stories has become a cult classic, revered for its artistic depth and haunting beauty, particularly among fans of progressive rock's more experimental side. Let me know if you've got a copy of this album. Now, finally, this time around, we have No Dice, and these were a British hard rock band formed in 1976 that blended raw energy of glam rock with the catchy hooks of mainstream rock. That's a combination. Their self-titled debut album was packed with infectious melodies, bluesy guitar riffs, and high-energy performances that echoed the sound of bands like Bad Company and Mott the Hoople. Songs like Why Sugar showcased their knack for writing memorable, foot-stomping rock anthems that could easily have made them household stars. However, No Dice faced tough competition in a hard rock landscape dominated by the big names like Led Zeppelin and Queen, and their particular style, whilst fun and engaging, didn't quite push the boundaries enough to make them stand out from the pack. By the time they released their second album, Two-Faced, in 1979, the musical trends really had shifted towards punk and new wave, and this left No Dice somewhat behind the curve. The band eventually split up in the early 80s, but their music, full of swagger and energy, remains a great example of the often overlooked British hard rock scene of that late 1970s period. So there you have it. 8 incredible bands that had all the talent and potential to dominate the rock scene, but, for one reason or another, never made it to the very, very top. Now, if you haven't checked out these bands, now's the time. Their music still stands the test of time and remains some of the best hidden treasures in the rock history. Now, the first video in this series listed 8 bands I thought you might not have heard of. And you can watch this video here. I'll see you over there.